I bet that the reason that you haven't planned that trip is probably because you're overcomplicating it. But lucky for you, you stumbled upon the initial installment of my Travel Planning Basics series, where the goal is to give you a simple, straightforward guide that's going to get you from scrolling to actually planning that dream trip that you've always wanted to go on. Let's get started. First things first, flights. So the reason we're starting with flights is not only because it's one of the major costs when booking a trip, but also because once you have flights nailed down, you probably have the date confirmed and you definitely know what the destination is going to be. It's very hard to plan an itinerary if you don't know if you're going to stay for a weekend or a full week, or if you're actually going to that dream destination. Either way, flights make sense to have at the front of your travel planning agenda. The only thing you're going to need for bookings is 2 websites, just 2. The first one is going to be a window shopping site where you can compare prices, you can compare dates, you can see what airlines probably make the most sense for you versus the site that you're actually going to book on. And more on that later as to why those are 2 separate things. Okay, so my tool of choice is Google Explore, which is connected to like Google Flights. And that's just my personal preference. It's worked for me. If you have other options that someone else in your life has recommended, like Kayak or Expedia, feel free to also use those. But the goal is just something that allows you to track and monitor flight prices and compare across different airlines and time periods. All I really need to know to start looking at flights is what is my home airport, which in this case is Philadelphia, but I also like adding EWR, which is in Newark, New Jersey. That's really all I need to know. And I can say I would like to go on a 1-week trip in the next 6 months to Europe. Yes, the whole continent of Europe. We can even narrow it down to, hey, we want to see what flight prices are looking like in June. We want to be more specific. So I would like a 1-week trip to Europe in June, and Google Explore is going to let me know what prices are looking like. So I have flight prices across the region. I can get as specific or as narrow as I want, but for the most part, if I want to go on a 1-week trip in June, these are some of the prices between $500 and $800, or probably more, depending on where you'd like to go. Now, one thing about flight prices, the more flexible you are, honestly, the greater the opportunity is for savings. So, for example, if I was just open to this 1 week in Europe over the next 6 months, I'm impartial to where the flights are. The trip to Dublin that was previously 5 something is now $328. Again, flexibility is your greatest asset. So, honing in on that flight to Dublin, because why not? I can see that the cheapest flight is offered by Iceland Air. However, it comes with a 3-hour layover in Reykjavik, as opposed to a direct flight from United for a few dollars more. So it's $393 versus $328. Another reason I really like Google Flights is you do have the ability to track flight prices if you so choose. And you also have the ability to see whether this price is average for that route and that time of year. So I can see that for this flight that I'm looking at, $396 is actually low for economy, and it's much cheaper than the average flight. And it can cost anywhere from $630 to $1,600. So taking a look at this flight, one thing I do want to point out with the window shopping websites is the price you see is probably going to be the price of basic economy, and that comes with some restrictions. So when looking for flights, yes, you can get a general idea of what things cost, but that final price is something you're going to want to dig a little deeper for, especially if you're going to need things like, luggage, you want to pick your seats. Just know that whatever price you're seeing through these sites are usually the bare minimum. They're just trying to get you from point A to point B. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I find that people usually want a little bit more than the basic economy, especially if they're going further distances. So just one thing to note. My recommendation on the second site that you're going to need for booking is that this site should always be the airline websites. And you're probably like, okay, why? The reason being is for ease when dealing with any sort of unexpected travel delays, whether that's flight cancellation, weather delays, you miss a connection, whatever it is, having to deal with a third-party company in those situations generally adds more stress and anxiety around the entire travel experience. Take, for example, if the airline cancels the flight for whatever reason, let's say weather. Usually if you've booked directly with them, you can go in the app or you can go on their website and you can pick a new flight and try to rebook. They usually give you options to help mitigate or say, hey, we can get you on this flight out. Or given that you're probably in the airport when this is happening, you can talk to an associate at the gate or at the customer service counter. On the flip side, if this happens and you've booked through a third-party website, you don't have that option to change the flight yourself. You're probably gonna have to deal with that third-party customer service. You're probably gonna have to wait on the phone, figure out what the resolution is. Even if the flight is refunding customers, you're not getting the refund, the third party's getting the refund. So there's just a lot more logistical effort that gets added to having to deal with that in a situation that's already anxiety-inducing as it is. So as a first-time traveler, I do not recommend booking through third party. Your booking site should always be the airline website. And as an added tip, I do recommend signing up for their free rewards program, not their travel credit card, their free rewards program to start earning miles. And now this isn't for the miles specifically, but I found that usually when I sign up for these rewards programs, there are added benefits. For example, I'm pretty sure on American, when I booked, without having the rewards program, I was dead last in terms of the boarding groups. However, once I signed up for the rewards program, even though I was buying the same tier of tickets, I think I was 1 to 2 boarding groups higher than had I not had the rewards program. So there's some tiny perks that might make it worth it, especially if you're traveling with a carry-on and you want to go in a bit earlier so that you can secure the overhead bin space, because not everyone wants to pay for luggage, okay? So that's my thought there. We have our 2 websites, our window shopping site and our booking site. What else do we need to think of as it relates to flights? The second, and I think very important thing to consider, is your layover time. So if you're looking at flights and the flight that you select has a short layover time, the thing that you need to keep in mind is whether that is sufficient time to get from your arrival gate to your transit or departure gate. Because a 1 hour layover in, let's say, Colorado Springs or even Newark, if you're traveling domestically, might be more than enough time to get to the next leg of your journey. It might simply be arriving at one gate and walking 10 minutes to the next gate without having to deal with immigration or going back through security. So 1 hour in some situations, more than sufficient. However, 1 hour on an international connection going through somewhere like, I don't know, London Heathrow Airport, throw away the rest of your itinerary. You weren't trying to get to your destination anyway, right? So the point of that is that it's completely dependent on the airport, the type of flight you're on, whether it's domestic, whether it's international, because in some cases you might have to go through immigration, recheck your bag, and do the entire process all over again before getting to your final gate. I remember one time I had a layover in Miami that was 40 minutes, and had it been a domestic flight, probably enough time. But that was actually my first point of entry into the US. And so I knew I would have to go through customs, get through immigrations and all of that jazz before I could get back into the terminal and get to my gate. So I decided instead to do a 2 hour connection so I would have sufficient time. 40 minutes would not have cut it. So if you have a short layover, keep in mind that you need to ensure it's sufficient time to get any connecting flights. Now, if you have a long layover, and I'm talking 8, 12, even 24 hours, don't be upset. Don't be upset. There is hope in terms of being able to do things. Now, I know what you're thinking. I'm new to this. Having to plan a trip before the trip seems completely overwhelming and not something that you might be interested in having to logistically manage. But the tip, if you have a long layover, is to look into free stopover programs. And what do I mean like that? Well, Turkish Airline, their free stopover program offers you free accommodations and free tours. And I know that sounds so far-fetched, but my friends and I did it. While in Turkey, we stayed at a really nice hotel and we were able to go and do, some sightseeing that was fully conducted by the Turkish Air Layover program. When I was in Taipei, Taiwan, I did the same thing. The airline wasn't in charge of the stopover program. It was actually the city. And so I went on like a 4-hour tour across Taipei where they picked me up at the airport and they brought me right back to my terminal. So all I had to do was show up at the check-in desk. And this isn't unique to these two countries. There are stopover programs for cities, airlines, and countries across the world. So definitely look into having a secondary mini vacation that all you need to do is show up and check in for. That sounds amazing, right? And why not? Because I've seen several countries through stopovers. I've stopped in Singapore, Turkey, as I mentioned, Taiwan, and also Switzerland. So don't knock sort of like having a really long layover, especially if you're, going on a long journey. Those could be the opportunities to see even more countries. My final tip for layover is that sometimes you might fall in that awkward middle ground where you have more than enough time to get to your gate, but not enough time to comfortably leave the airport and do some sightseeing or touring. In that instance, well, you might not have much of a choice, but my recommendation is always to look into what activities can you do around the airport itself, because depending on where you are in the world, there might be a lot of options. For example, Changi Airport in Singapore has an indoor waterfall known as the Jewel. There's also a free movie theater, a butterfly sanctuary. There is so many things to do in that airport that honestly, staying in the airport during a layover is not a terrible thing. Now, this will be dependent on what time your layover is. Sometimes it can be in less than ideal times, like overnight or super early in the morning, but it is always worth checking out what are some fun things you can do in and around the airport without actually having to leave. So that was a decent amount of information, but you're not here for information, are you? Right? You're here to have actionable steps to actually book that trip that you were dreaming of. So, your activity to complete this chapter of flights is that I want you to go online, pick a destination, and then I want you to capture 1, 2, 3 flights that you could potentially book. Again, you don't have to book it yet. Slow your roll. And I want you to figure out what's the total cost of that flight. Meaning if you were to add baggage, maybe picking your seat. So going beyond, hey, Google Flights says it's $300, so it's $300. And then getting a jump scare when you realize that boarding in general economy is actually $450, okay? And lastly, I would like you to maybe highlight a quick pros and cons of what you like or don't like about each flight, and nothing complicated. It could literally be most expensive, but least hassle because it's a direct flight. Or it could be that it's the least expensive, but the layover feels like a hassle or too much or overwhelming, and that's why you're hesitant. So just really high level. And you don't need to use a fancy Excel sheet. You can literally just screenshot these flights, open your notes app, jot them down, whatever you need to do. Just capture 1 to 3 flights, find the total cost, and then figure out what you like or dislike about it. And that's all. That's all. Whether it's that big trip that you really want to plan for next year that's like to Japan, or whether you just wanted to plan a local girls trip to, I don't know, Arizona. That's a good one though. Whatever it is, the goal of this series is really to get you from scrolling and gathering information online and actually taking actionable steps, because you wouldn't have been listening this far, right? If you weren't serious, because you are serious, right? Okay. And there you have it. In the next episode, we'll dive deeper into planning an itinerary for that trip, because I feel like this is where people get the most overwhelmed. But if you've made it this far, thank you. And leave a comment down below on where your dream destination is for this year, or maybe next year. But let us know in the comments.